Sonia Luna, CEO of Aviva Spectrum, wanting to share the best way to evaluate how long your implementation will take, and more importantly, deciding if implementing BlackLine on your own, using your own team members and staff, is actually the best decision. Here are some implementation best practices first and foremost. You're going to need some key milestones. I'm sharing with you the 7 phases of implementing BlackLine that even the BlackLine folks themselves leverage. The first of which is the planning and the design phase. Okay, it goes through a lot of which modules are you going to go online first, and more importantly, what does that look like, what entities will be involved, etc. Phase 2 is the end user expectations. It's understanding how it's going to be used day in and day out by various users within the organization. And then the settings documentation, and it's also going to include some training requirements that everybody's going to need to focus in on. This includes some of the IT folks, but the main bulk of the folks that will be understanding these setting documents as well as some of the training requirements are going to be the end users like the accounting staff, CFO, etc. Phase 4 is the build phase. Okay, so now the expectations and how it's supposed to look and feel and some of the net results you're going to measure are in phases 1 and 3. 4 is getting it up and running, using those import templates, selecting the templates that you want to use for various modules, etc. And then 5 is the user acceptance testing, getting folks to actually go into the sandbox and validate some of the settings, etc., that they agreed to in phases 1 and 3. 6 is user training and the decision to go live, right? Moving away from that sandbox environment and going into production, and then determining not only some of the key, let's say, settings that needed to be augmented for your environment, making sure that your users understand it, but more importantly, what training they need to have going forward, as well as the closeout with final approval. So this is the last phase of an implementation project. So everything that I'm giving you here is exactly what BlackLine in-house would have in an implementation. Plus, if you go to various sources like Amazon, other bookstores, etc., you're going to find that when you do an implementation project, these 7 phases keep coming up. They may sound a little different, or the words might be a little slightly off from what I'm using here, but the principles are exactly the same for a great implementation project of a software product. I want to give you the 3 mid-market budget issues when you are just trying to turn on the lights. Okay, I am not talking about BlackLine super optimization. I'm talking about just turning on the lights to get this thing up and running. Number 1 consideration when you do come up with time budgets is, okay, how much time do my staff actually have? Okay, I'm giving you the minimum budget per module. So if you decide to go with account recs and tasks, this is on a per module basis. So at a minimum, I would be conservative and get my admins to give them 12 hours per module. This includes some of the documentation requirements, some training videos, etc., that they're going to need to do. The people that are going to be using it on a weekly, daily, quarterly, etc. basis, budget per module 15 hours minimum for each user, right? IT support, again, you might need 1 or 2 folks, but give them each about 15 hours. This includes making sure that they understand the environment, the connections, FTP sites, etc., etc. Now, I wanted to get into the other issue, just turning on the lights. The second consideration mid-market folks fail to put into their budget, okay, about how many hours they internally are going to need to spend, is timing. Okay, you have other stuff going on besides implementing a software tool. So looking at your close calendar and understanding what reporting deadlines, whether that's packages, if you're sending out board packets, even though you're a private company, or let's say banking reporting issues. And if you're a publicly traded company, you obviously have your close calendar with SEC reporting deadlines. And then let's not forget key stakeholders. So it could be external auditors, the board, executives, other folks that need work from the finance and accounting department, certain key reports or close issues. Lastly, projects. Let's face it, not everything goes as planned in a calendar year. Okay, do you really know when that M&A thing is really going to trigger and you're now going to need to integrate, let's say, new staff? Are you really going to be prepared for a tax audit? It could be payroll, state and local, it could be federal, etc. What about those benefit audits? There's a lot that accounting does besides reconcile the books. And these projects, some of them are known, some of them are unknown. They just happen, and boom, accounting staff has to take it on. So take this into consideration in terms of timing, because if you pick a timeline like first quarter, second, third, etc., and you know your heaviest close items or issues happen in a particular quarter, then you're picking, at least you're hedging your bet, right, against the worst case scenario, which is you stop and go with an implementation. I don't care what software product you pick, but if you keep doing stop and go, it's going to take longer and longer and longer to implement that software product. Now I wanted to get to item number 3 for just turning on the light switch. Some budgetary issues, especially I see in the mid-market, is process changes. So imagine everybody looks at the demo of BlackLine, CFO, controller, staff, and they are just like, wow, this thing is going to be able to do what? It's going to streamline this? Right. Now, you're going to just turn on the light switch, get some data in there, and then just have a minute little change in the workflow in BlackLine. Okay, so in other words, are you really just turning it on just to kind of drag data in and then just kind of put the workflow in there just so people can sign off faster? Or are you really going to optimize some of the banking, receipts, payments, etc., all of that so that matching is done automatically? You're putting in best rules, you're testing out these rules, etc. In other words, you got to think about the time requirement it's going to take to get things done right, especially with those banking POS systems, mass transaction items that are going to flow, and you want a system to automate. So old process was very manual. That's why you pick BlackLine. Okay, now understanding how that process needs to change and be automated into BlackLine, you're going to have to review what the current state was and then what the future state would look like, and then how to optimize it in, let's say, year 2 after, let's say, post implementation. You want some best practices. Journal entries, we've all seen it. Last minute pop-ups, or it could be from both external auditors, or it could be something that the executive team decided in terms of, it could be tax issues, equity issues. Don't get me started on other accrued liabilities, but these things come up. So think about this. You sat in a room, saw the demo, and loved the product, and you're like, this is going to optimize things. And then, those last minute issues, headaches related to journal entries, you're not going to revisit what that process was like? Come on. So think through your budgetary issues when you implement BlackLine. If you do want to start going down the road and changing processes that were very archaic, very manual, or better yet, there are certain people or other types of technology that prevented you from, let's say, doing something very quickly, you should revisit some of those processes, and that will take somebody's time. The last is the financial close procedures. It's the stuff that the external auditors might say verbally as a best practice. Hey, you should at least once a year look at those policies and procedures. Yeah, and yet no one does it. Okay, but then you buy the tool, and then you're like, oh, all I just got to do is copy and paste it and put in this, this slot over here for BlackLine. So if everything's perfect, hey, it's not a budgetary issue on how long it's going to take you to implement it, right? You're just going to copy and paste it because you looked at it every year, right? It's up to date. It's totally up to par. It's exactly what you currently do. Come on, guys. For a fact that there's certain policies and procedures that you wrote down a long time ago that were not updated. And when you do turn on the light, you're going to need some time to review it, to really make sure it accurately reflects what's going on in your environment. So think through that in terms of how long it's going to take you to implement BlackLine. I wanted to come up with some final tips here. When you check references, ask them how long it took them. Okay, so forget about what they initially thought. So you can check certain references. You can talk to your BlackLine account, right? And say, hey, I want to check a reference, with my industry, et cetera, et cetera. And then say, so if you had to do it all over again and you had to create a budget of how long it's going to take to implement, would you do anything to change that budget? Okay, I've asked that question of just even current clients, and they haven't hired us. They did it themselves. And they said, no, it took a little bit longer. All those items, those top 3 budgetary issues I just showed you, were at least 1, if not 2 of those items, okay, that they underestimated it would take for their people to do because they're busy, okay? Leverage your LinkedIn connections and pick up the phone. Call people that you know that have it. BlackLine even has a customer list. If you know folks from those organizations, ask them how long it's taken them. Prioritize which modules you're really going to turn on and hone in on the optimization or automating that close procedure. So I would not recommend turning everything on unless I had a great amount of resources or I had a great implementation partner. But even then, I would still prioritize which modules turn on and what follows, let's say in another period, et cetera, et cetera. And then the BlackLine conference. For those of you who have yet to attend, there's ways of getting in, but my point is this: I've attended it. It's a fabulous conference, and there you can hear from folks that not only love the tool, but are existing clients. You can ask them what it takes to really implement other modules. Let's say you decide to only do 2 or 3. Going to the conference gives you basically unfiltered access to these customers that will tell you how long it takes in terms of the implementation process. And more importantly, the conference allows you to meet BlackLine's great CEO, Therese Tucker, and she's a wonderful asset not only to the accounting and finance world, she's truly an innovator in optimizing our function. So I'd highly recommend attending the conference if you have that capability of going to it. Now, most of you know we have a BlackLine services page on our website. It's in the services section. Now we have an insights section that has a template, and it's on the ROI model that most people want to know about when it comes to direct labor costs. What I'm offering you today is a free ROI review for yourself on direct labor costs with me personally. You can reach me at 424-625-0241 or info@avivaspectrum.com. And we hope when you calculate your choices, you choose Aviva Spectrum.